What up, good people? Happy Sabbath. I'm laying down, so the camera's gonna look a little crazy, I guess. But I wanted to share something because God has been having me kind of reflect just on the whole process of Moses trying to get the Israelites to the Exodus. And so one thing when you consider the story of the Israelites being freed from the Egyptians, right, from the rulers, right, who intentionally gave them the hard work just so they wouldn't rise up against them, was the fact that once Moses did actually get them free, right, and before I even go there, one of the things that um, we as believers or as children of God, as the Israelites can celebrate, right, is that Pharaoh did not have any peace until he conceded with what God was demanding of him, right? He didn't have any peace until he conceded and fully agreed to let the Israelites go. And even upon doing that, he kept experiencing different things because even though he knew that God had come to free the Israelites, he still decided to chase after them, which ended up in even further destruction, right? So instead of just doing what God instructed him to do, even though his heart had already been hardened toward the Israelites, right? He continued to chase after them, ultimately leading to the destruction that flooded everything pertaining to him, right? But when we look at the Israelites in the wilderness, they ended up being in the wilderness so long because of complaining. But when we also consider part of some of their complaints, right? There's some of their complaints was their desire to be back in Egypt. And so even though they were free, they never really had the full experience of freedom because mentally they were still chained to their past. They were still chained to the very thing that God was trying to free them from. hmm So many people are scared to let go of the very thing that's keeping them in bondage. I'm talking about a literal freedom. How you doing? I'm talking about a literal freedom though. So many people are afraid to let go of the very thing, the very system, the very way of life that was given to them. They're afraid to let that go because they rather have the bondage than the freedom. And some people don't realize that even when the bondage was released from them, that they still never got to fully enjoy the freedom because mentally they were chained to the past. They were chained to the idea that Pharaoh had so deeply ingrained within them that they never got to fully enjoy the freedom that God intended for them to have. We see that now. We we are literally experiencing that right now. We can't get freedom if we're scared to let go of the very things that's keeping us in bondage. And that's physically and mentally. If we're stuck holding on to a way of life that clearly is not working, right? The way of life that we've been given or that we've been told this is what you should do. You got to do XYZ, check these boxes, you check these boxes that okay, good. You're a functional part of society, right? But what part of society has functioned to your benefit? What part of society has functioned to your benefit? At what point when God is trying to free you, are you going to accept and realize without the complaining, how you doing, that that's exactly what God is trying to do? He's trying to free and release you into a new land, into a new territory, into a new way of life that has rest. But the Israelites didn't even get to enjoy what God was trying to take them to because they were too busy complaining and because their minds were still stuck in Egypt. They were still stuck in Egypt. They didn't want to let go of what they got in Egypt. They didn't want to let go of the way of life that Egypt had raised them up in. They didn't even get to experience the new life or the new territory that God wanted to provide for them because their complaints canceled out all of what God desired to give them. They barely even got a whiff of the new air. They didn't even get a meal. They got to see it. They got to witness it, but they didn't get to partake in it because their complaining throughout the wilderness, which was only extended because of their complaining, had them miss out on everything that God wanted to do in their life. A lot of people are afraid to let go of Egypt and the lifestyle of Egypt because it's, even though they're being chained and being put in bondage, it's something that they can control, right? So yeah, I know I have to work hard, I have to do all of these things, I have to check all of these boxes, but I can control this, right? I can choose to get up and still go and do XYZ, and I know that if I do X, Y, and Z, it'll produce X, Y, and Z. But when God had pulled them out of Egypt and called them to trust him in the wilderness, that would have only been for a short amount of time had they not spent the time complaining. They would have been able to walk right into a completely different life. But they were scared to do that. They were scared to let go of Egypt 100%. How you doing? They were scared to let go of Egypt 100%. Walking through the wilderness was too much for them. They rather have the hard labor, the excessive labor that Pharaoh was putting on them than walking across the sands to get to the freedom that God intended for them to have. God was trying to release them from bondage and hard labor, and he desired to give them rest and a new life in Exodus. He was trying to get them to a new life where they would have rest. But they rather desire the hard work in Egypt. Ain't that interesting? They wanted the life of Egypt over the life of rest and newness, a new beginning, a new everything that God desired to give them. But some of their minds were still stuck on the fact that I'd rather have slavery. I'd rather have the chains than have to walk through this sand for whatever amount of time and be grateful that God released me from this hard labor. And because that was their heart's desire and they spent all of their time complaining, ultimately they were right back in a new form of bondage because they didn't even get to enjoy what God intended for them. Because they weren't appreciative of where God was trying to take them. They didn't want to go through the process to get where God was desiring to take them. And so when they did finally get there, God said, I'm not going to allow you to enjoy it either. You didn't want to be here. You complained the whole time while I was trying to take you there. You didn't like the person that I sent you to help you get there. And so now that you're here, you don't even get to enjoy it. You won't be able to enjoy it. Pharaoh only wanted the people to work like that because it benefited him. It gave him control because he feared them leaving and realizing that they were greater than them. He feared the Israelites realizing that they were more than the Egyptians. As I've been sitting, just dwelling on that, God also began to talk to me about, are you ready to refuse to bow? Are you ready to refuse to bow? See, the only reason Pharaoh also gave them hard work, put that extra labor on them, was because he wanted the Israelites to be subservient to him. It was a move of submission, forced submission on the Israelites. None of what Pharaoh did to the Israelites was for their benefit. It was to keep them in a position to be subservient to his desires. It was a distraction from the people rising up. So even when God gave them the space and opportunity to rise or to walk into something new, because the new was unfamiliar or uncomfortable, they complained. They didn't want it. They despised the hardship that God gave them and preferred the hardship that Pharaoh was giving them. Ain't that something else? Isn't that something else? To despise the hardship that God will put you through and say, I'd rather suffer at the hands of Pharaoh, at the hands of Egypt, than endure something that would have been a short while had they been grateful for the process. Sometimes God takes us through some things that are uncomfortable, that are unfamiliar. And we sit there and complain instead of saying, God, where are you taking me? What are you trying to show me? Where am I? Instead of just saying, God, I trust you, I'm gonna follow you. God, I thank you for the provision that you've given me. God, I've laid my request at your feet and you've provided for me. God, I thank you. The people probably weren't even getting their desires fulfilled from Pharaoh if they had to ask him. But they complained because they didn't want to endure the hardships that God had for them, even though it was lighter. Ain't that something? They rather had suffered at the hands of Pharaoh than endure being uncomfortable at the hands of God. Haven't we seen that somewhere? We've seen that somewhere, right? Where people will rather suffer at the hands of Pharaoh than to endure the discomfort just but for a little while under God. And then they'll say, well, why did they have to go through 40 years? They were complaining. That's just like somebody desiring a peaceful house, a peaceful partnership, a peaceful relationship. And all you're doing is complaining the whole time. How is anybody going to have peace? How is the head going to feel appreciated if all you're doing is complaining, even though they're constantly giving, 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 giving? And every time they give, it's not good enough. You want something else. Do more. Jesus was the head and was leading them. He was speaking directly to the God that they gave them to navigate through the wilderness, and they weren't satisfied. They despised the God that God sent. But because of all of that, God said, fine. You complained the whole time. It wouldn't even have been as long, but because you complained so much and you showed me that throughout that entire time, your heart was still stuck on a place that I was trying to take you from, then I'm not going to let you to enjoy this place. I'm going to let you see it. I'm going to let you get a whiff of it. But you don't get to enjoy it. Are you prepared not to bow? And how will you know if you're prepared not to bow to Satan's plan for your life? We know all knees, all of those good things will bow before the Lord Jesus Christ, right? But we also know that Satan desires to ensnare and entrap us because he wants that praise. He wants that control over us. Are you prepared not to bow to Satan's plans and gimmicks and desires for your life? And you'll know if you're ready based off of how easily are you able to detach from the very things that the world says this is the height, this is the peak. How easily are you able to detach from the very things that the world has told you this makes you somebody? And if you really sit and you think about it and you process and you realize that maybe you're still struggling to detach your God-given image away from any worldly image that's been established, then there's work mentally and spiritually that you have to do to be prepared to not bow to what Satan is desiring from you. And if you're not in that space, you got to get there. You got to realize that right now, all of these things are just tools. They're not the ultimate end goal for our life. So many people love to tell me, oh, you do all of these things. And well, they don't tell me. They just talk about it indirectly. But I mean, I see, so whatever. But so many people will look at a person and be like, oh, you're trying to do this, you're trying to do that. I'm just trying to talk to y'all. Talk to those of y'all that have ears to hear what the Spirit is giving me to say to y'all. That's it. Everything else is just everything else. But how many of us are prepared, are equipped to not bow to what Satan wants from us? Because they're only applying the pressure because the pressure distracts you from realizing whose you are and how mighty you are as a whole. Do you understand that? Do you understand the pressure only shows you whose you are and how mighty you are as a whole? I told y'all every time I come on, my little fans gotta pop out with their little race cars. So that's all that is. I got a Fast and the Furious fan club. I ain't even got no 6-speed car. That's crazy. I ain't got none of them little cars, but I got a fan club. They like to follow me around with their little vroom vroom. So I told y'all that before in another video, okay? But are you prepared not to bow? Or are you still stuck on the fact that you rather have the suffering of Egypt than the temporary suffering that God might have for you to get to this new place. Because that's really what it's going to come down to you. Can you buckle down and say, God, I'll endure. God, I will. Because ultimately, what God desires for us is better than the Egypt we've been living in. But we can't get to the promised land still desiring and afraid to let go of the Egyptian lifestyle. We can't get to the promised land still trying to hold on to the Egyptian ways of life. We have to buckle down on the side and know and be grounded in the fact that, yeah, we want to get to the promised land. We want to get to the new that God is desiring to take us to. It's some suffering involved. The Israelites clearly felt like they were suffering enduring the wilderness, right? It's a little bit of suffering involved, but it's a lighter affliction than what the enemy is trying to put on you. It's a lighter affliction than what the enemy desires to put on you. And if we get stuck in the Egyptian mentality, we'll never be able to enjoy the promised land. And we'll miss out on everything that God has for us. Are you prepared not to bow to Satan, to his plans, to his desires for your life, for your children's life, for your future generations' life? Are you prepared to say no? Are you prepared not to bow to Satan? Are you prepared and say, I'm Team Jesus all the way? God, I will endure. Are you prepared to be in that mindset? Are you prepared to trust that regardless of if you're not working through the wilderness, that God is going to provide for you in the wilderness? I can only imagine that they were stuck on the fact that what they didn't have. They were too busy worried about what they didn't have. Why? Because they were stuck on their image and not on God's. They didn't want to endure not having because that impacted their image, not God's image. God does not care about what we do or don't have. Why? Because he knows that if he desires for us to have something, it's nothing for him to provide it for us. And we see that in the story of them traveling through the wilderness, right? He knows that he's the type of father that if we ask, he will give. Now that was definitely for me, okay? Because I won't. After a while, I just that was for me. That piece was for me. It was for us, but that was definitely for me. He knows that if we ask, he'll provide. But so many are focused on what we have, desiring more, and sometimes the more that we desire is not even what God desires for us. And I'm not saying that God doesn't want us to have more. What I'm saying is what God wants to give us is better, but it might not be what we desire. That's what I'm saying. So, what you gonna choose? Are you gonna choose to suffer in Egypt or choose to endure the minor affliction or a minor wilderness journey intended? Or are you going to complain the whole way through? Extend the journey just to miss out on enjoying what it is that God is trying to give us? Are you going to be the one who says, my image matters so much to me that if Satan asks me, I'm going to say, yes, I'm going to bow. I'm going to surrender to the plans of the enemy for my life because I'd rather endure this suffering than endure the process and the journey to get to freedom and the new life, the new thing that God is desiring to do for me and the generations to come after me. Something to think about on this lovely Sabbath. But yeah, I hope y'all have a great day. That's the word that I got that I wanted to share. And I'll catch y'all later. Love you later.